Jack Harmon woke before dawn, as he had every day for the past 20 years. Military habits died hard. He sat on the edge of his bed in the restored foreman's house, listening to the profound silence of Independence, a ghost town reborn. The digital clock read 0500, right on schedule. Through the window, pre-dawn light cast the desert valley in shades of deep blue. Jack pulled on his boots, worn but meticulously maintained, like everything else he owned, and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of sage and mineral dust. Below him, the 30-odd buildings of Independence stood in quiet formation, their windows dark except for the soft glow from the community kitchen where early risers gathered. Jack stretched, feeling the familiar pull of scar tissue along his left side. Fallujah, 2004. The memory surfaced and receded like a tide, present but no longer overwhelming. Progress. His radio crackled. "Morning, Captain." It was Frank Miller, former Army sniper, now handling the dawn watch from the water tower that crowned the highest point of Independence. Status. Jack kept his voice low, though sound carried strangely in the desert. All quiet. Coyotes moved through the south wash around 0300. Nothing human. Jack nodded to himself. Appreciate it. Breakfast in 30. 6 years ago, Jack had stumbled upon Independence while hiking through remote New Mexico backcountry, trying to outrun demons that followed him home from his fourth and final deployment. The abandoned mining town, nestled in a defensible valley with clear sight lines in all directions, spoke to something deep in his tactical mind. What had begun as a personal rehabilitation project, fixing the foreman's house with his Marine Corps disability pay, evolved when Miguel Ortiz, a former Army Ranger who'd served alongside Jack in Afghanistan, showed up with a truck full of lumber and a similar haunted look in his eyes. "Heard you were building something," Miguel had said simply. They'd worked side by side for 3 months before either discussed their nightmares. Jack walked down the main street now, boots crunching on gravel. The town had a functional elegance. Nothing wasted, nothing for show. Solar panels gleamed on south-facing roofs. A sophisticated water catchment system fed underground cisterns. Gardens thrived in raised beds enriched with composted soil. 23 veterans now called Independence home, each finding purpose in the restoration work and the community they'd built. Each building had been carefully reinforced, not just against the elements, but with subtle defensive features that would escape casual notice: bulletproof glass in key windows, reinforced door frames, secondary exits, and strategic firing positions. Old habits, indeed. Inside the community kitchen, formerly the town's general store, Sarah Chin was brewing coffee. At 42, the former Air Force pararescue specialist moved with the economical grace of someone who'd spent years keeping wounded soldiers alive under fire. Her medical kit was never more than arm's reach away. "You're brooding again," she said without looking up from the coffee grounds. "Am I?" Jack accepted the steaming mug she offered. "Just thinking about the garden rotation." Sarah's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Frank told me about the tracks Miguel found yesterday." "Cartel." Jack sipped his coffee. No point hiding information in a community this small. "Probably. Border Patrol says they're pushing new routes since the checkpoint expansion." "How close?" "Ridgeline east side. Watching us, I think." Sarah nodded, absorbing this without visible concern. They'd all faced worse than being watched. "Should we tell the others?" "At breakfast." No need to interrupt anyone's sleep. Jack moved to the window, scanning the horizon automatically. "We've been expecting this since we started intercepting their scouts last month." The Mexican cartels had been probing deeper into U.S. territory, establishing way stations and supply caches in remote areas. Independence, despite its growing population, still appeared largely abandoned to outside observers, perfect cover for illicit operations. Or so the cartel thought. Dwayne Williams entered the kitchen, his massive frame filling the doorway. The former Navy SEAL nodded to both of them, heading straight for the coffee. At 51, he was the oldest resident of Independence, with 27 years of special operations experience etched into the lines of his face. Morning, folks. Dwayne poured coffee with surprisingly delicate movements for hands that could break a man's neck in seconds. Felt like a good day to check the perimeter sensors. Any particular reason? Jack smiled slightly. Nothing escaped notice in a town full of hyper-vigilant combat veterans. We'll discuss it when everyone's here. By 0630, the kitchen was filled with the controlled energy of military efficiency. Breakfast was served, eaten, and cleared away with minimal fuss. 23 pairs of eyes, all having seen the worst humanity could offer, focused on Jack as he spread a topographical map across the central table. Miguel and Frank found boot prints yesterday, here and here. Jack marked the locations with red dots. Pattern and depth suggest military-style boots, 5 individuals, moving with purpose. They maintained position for approximately 3 hours, observing our town. Murmurs rippled through the group. Not alarm, but professional interest. Border Patrol contact confirms increased cartel movement in our sector, Jack continued. They're establishing new routes since the Gallegos checkpoint expansion. Our intelligence suggests they're looking for staging areas between here and El Paso. And we look like an empty ghost town from a distance, Miguel Ortiz added, his Mexican-American heritage giving him particular insight into cartel operations. Perfect cover for their operations. Jack nodded. Exactly. What they don't know is that we've been monitoring their communications for weeks. He gestured to Emily Reeves, former Army intelligence, who had established their modest signal intercept station in the old post office. She stood, tablet in hand. I've captured fragments of encrypted communications suggesting a larger operation plan for this area. They're referring to a Pueblo Fantasma, ghost town, as a potential staging point. Timeline indicates between 72 and 96 hours from now. The room remained calm, veterans processing this information methodically. Questions? Jack asked. Frank Miller, his lean sniper's frame coiled with constant readiness, spoke first. Rules of engagement? A critical question. They weren't vigilantes looking for trouble, but neither would they abandon their home to criminals. We document and report everything to Border Patrol, Jack said firmly. But if they enter our town with hostile intent, we defend ourselves with appropriate force. Each team lead will review defensive protocols today. Sarah raised her hand. Medical supplies? Full inventory by noon. Requisition whatever you need. Miguel's making a supply run today. The meeting continued with clinical precision, assignments distributed according to expertise. To an outsider, it might have seemed like overkill for what could be routine border activity. But everyone in the room had survived because they prepared for worst-case scenarios. As the meeting concluded, Jack felt a familiar sensation settling in his chest, not the choking anxiety that had once driven him to isolation, but the focused clarity that preceded combat operations. This was what they'd trained for. This was what they knew. Later that morning, Jack walked the perimeter with Miguel, checking the subtle defenses they'd integrated into the landscape. Motion sensors disguised as rocks, cameras hidden in weathered fence posts, communication relays powered by small solar cells. Reminds me of securing that village outside Kandahar, Miguel said, adjusting a loose connection. Remember? The one with the old Russian bunkers we repurposed. Jack nodded. 3 weeks securing that place, and not a single casualty. Good training for this. They paused at the ridge overlooking the eastern approach, the most likely avenue for cartel activity. The desert stretched away in rolling waves of ochre and rust, dotted with scrub and yucca. Beautiful, but unforgiving. You ever think about how strange this is? Miguel asked, squinting against the sun. That we spent all that time fighting overseas, only to end up defending American soil right here? Jack considered this. Not strange. Just ironic. We went looking for enemies abroad, and they found us at home. Miguel smiled without humor. My grandfather crossed the border looking for a better life. Now I'm keeping criminals from crossing that same line. Different people, Different purposes, Jack said simply. They completed their circuit in companionable silence, the kind that forms between men who have faced death together. Back in town, Jack found Sarah organizing the medical station in what had once been the town saloon. "Need another pair of hands?" he offered. Sarah glanced up from her inventory. "I've got it covered, but I could use your signature on these requisition forms. I'm doubling our trauma supplies." As Jack signed the forms, he studied Sarah's methodical movements. They'd met during a joint operation in Afghanistan, his Marine unit providing security while her pararescue team extracted wounded from a hot landing zone. She'd saved 3 of his men that day, working with preternatural calm under heavy fire. "You're quiet," she observed, continuing her inventory. Thinking about Helmand Province. That extraction under fire. Sarah's hands paused briefly before continuing. "That was a bad day." "It was. But I remember watching you work and thinking, there's someone who knows exactly who they are and what they're meant to do." She looked up, surprise softening her features. "Is that what you think?" "Because I was terrified every second." "That's what made it brave," Jack said simply. "Fear acknowledged but not surrendered to." Sarah considered this, then nodded. "Like what we're doing here." "Exactly like that." Later At afternoon, Jack climbed the church tower, their primary observation post, and found Frank already there, customized rifle resting across his lap as he scanned the horizon through high-powered binoculars. "Movement?" Jack asked. "Nothing significant. Dust cloud about 8 miles south, probably border patrol." Frank handed over the binoculars. "You think they'll really come?" Jack studied the terrain, noting potential approach routes, coverage, exposure points. "Yes, this location is too valuable. Isolated, appearance of abandonment, good road access but off main routes. Perfect staging area." Frank nodded, accepting the assessment. "We're ready if they do." They both knew ready was relative. 23 veterans, even highly trained ones, against potentially superior cartel numbers wasn't ideal. But they had home field advantage, preparation time, and the element of surprise. "Remember that cluster of buildings in Ramadi?" Jack asked. "The ones we had to clear room by room?" Frank smiled grimly. 3 days of urban hell. But we knew every corner by the end. That's our advantage here. We know every loose floorboard, every creaky stair, every line of sight. This place was built for defense, mining towns always were. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across Independence, Jack gathered the team leads for final preparations. Dwayne Williams would coordinate close-quarter defense teams. Frank would organize overwatch positions. Sarah would establish a central medical station with satellite points. Miguel would handle communications and explosives, the latter carefully set to disable vehicles rather than cause casualties. "We're not looking for a fight," Jack reminded them. "But we will be ready if one finds us." That night, Jack stood alone on his porch, watching stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. The weight of responsibility pressed on his shoulders, not just for the mission, but for the lives of everyone who had found purpose and healing in this reclaimed ghost town. He had led men and women into combat zones across the world, but defending their own home carried a different gravity. His radio crackled softly. "Captain, you might want to see this." Frank's voice was steady but urgent. Jack acknowledged and headed for the church tower. Inside the small observation room, Frank pointed to a thermal imaging display. 8 heat signatures, moving in tactical formation, approaching from the south ridge. "Advanced scouts," Jack said, studying their movement pattern. "Professional. Military training." "Cartel enforcers," Frank agreed. "Former Mexican Special Forces, most likely." Jack keyed his radio, voice calm and clear. "All teams, condition yellow." "I repeat, condition yellow. This is not a drill." Across Independence, lights dimmed as veterans moved to pre-designated positions. The town seemed to hold its breath, transforming from a peaceful community to a fortress in the space of minutes. "And so it begins," Frank murmured, chambering a round in his rifle. Jack felt that familiar clarity descending. mind sharpening, senses heightening, extraneous thoughts falling away. This was what they had trained for. This was what they knew. Independence would not fall tonight. The cartel scouts moved like shadows against the darkness, their night vision equipment revealing the contours of the ghost town below. From their vantage point on the ridge, Independence looked abandoned, a cluster of weathered buildings slowly returning to the desert. "Perfect," murmured Alejandro, the team leader, in Spanish. Isolated, hidden from main roads. No signs of occupation. He lowered his binoculars and made notes on a tactical pad. Some buildings appear recently stabilized. Could be treasure hunters or historical preservation efforts. His second-in-command, Raul, frowned. Those solar panels look new. Government equipment. They monitor border activity with automated stations. Alejandro gestured dismissively. "We've seen them before." What the scouts couldn't see was Frank Miller, completely motionless in his ghillie suit 50 meters to their east, documenting every word through a directional microphone. Nor did they detect the infrared security cameras disguised as rock formations, transmitting their images to the command center in Independence's church. In that makeshift command center, Jack Harmon studied the feed with Miguel and Emily. The cartel scouts wore tactical gear that wouldn't look out of place on special forces operators, modular vests, encrypted communication equipment, military-grade weapons. Former Mexican military, Miguel confirmed, recognizing their movement patterns. Probably GAIF or Marines before joining the cartel. Emily adjusted the audio feed. "I'm picking up their comms. They're reporting back to someone named Emilio, describing our town as an ideal staging area." Jack zoomed in on their equipment. "They're mapping sight lines and approaches, planning something significant." "Timeline?" Miguel asked. "Based on their conversation, 3 days before the main force arrives." Jack nodded. "Decision made. We maintain our cover. No one appears outside during daylight. No fires, no visible lights after dark. Let them think this place is abandoned." Over the next 48 hours, the veterans of Independence executed a flawless disappearing act. Everyday activities continued underground or inside blacked-out buildings. Garden work happened at night under red lights that wouldn't carry far. Communication relied on hardwired systems rather than radio when possible. Meanwhile, the cartel's presence intensified. Surveillance drones, commercial models modified for extended range, buzzed the perimeter. More scouts appeared, methodically photographing the town from multiple angles. Jack observed it all from concealed positions, building a comprehensive picture of their adversary. This wasn't a small-time operation. The equipment, personnel, and planning suggested significant resources. On the third day, Jack called a strategy meeting in the reinforced basement beneath the church. "Intel update." He began, projecting captured drone footage onto the wall. "We're looking at a major operation." Emily intercepted communications confirming a large shipment moving through, with Independence as the staging area. The assembled veterans studied the footage with professional detachment. "Composition?" Dwayne asked, ever tactical. "Approximately 30 personnel divided into security and transport teams. Heavily armed, automatic weapons, probable explosives. For main vehicles plus motorcycles for perimeter security." Sarah leaned forward. "Timeline?" "Tomorrow. Advanced team at 0700, main force by noon." Jack switched to a topographical map of Independence. They planned to use the general store as a command post, the livery stables for vehicles, and the hotel for personnel. Miguel tapped the map where their own positions were marked. "So they'll be walking right into our prepared defenses without knowing it." "Exactly." Jack highlighted key buildings. "But we're not looking for a direct confrontation unless absolutely necessary. Our primary objective is intelligence gathering for Border Patrol." Frank scoffed softly. "Border Patrol is 2 hours away at best. If these guys decide to use our town, we'll need to handle it ourselves." Jack acknowledged this with a nod. "Which is why we have contingency plans. If they enter with clearly hostile intent or discover our presence, we implement Operation Dusty Ghost. On the screen, a detailed defense plan appeared: sectors of responsibility, fields of fire, fallback positions, communication protocols. Months of preparation distilled into a comprehensive strategy. Questions? Jack asked. Dwayne raised his hand. Rules of engagement? We document everything through our surveillance system. If they enter peacefully to scout locations, we observe only. If they bring in shipments or set up operations, we notify Border Patrol and continue observation from concealed positions. Jack's expression hardened slightly. If they discover us and respond with hostile action, we defend ourselves with appropriate force. Priority is protecting our people and neutralizing threats, not inflicting casualties. The veterans nodded, understanding the distinction. They weren't vigilantes or executioners, just prepared to defend what was theirs. Get some rest, Jack concluded. Tomorrow will be a long day. Dawn broke with unusual stillness over Independence. Not even birds called in the early light, as if the desert itself sensed the coming confrontation. At precisely 0652, the perimeter sensors on the southern approach activated. Jack, positioned in the church tower, watched through high-powered binoculars as two SUVs with tinted windows approached slowly along the dirt road. Behind him, Emily monitored communications while Miguel coordinated their surveillance network. Advanced team, Jack confirmed. For individuals in the lead vehicle, 3 in the second. All armed. The vehicle stopped at the edge of town. Men emerged cautiously, weapons held at ready positions, not actively threatening, but prepared for trouble. Their leader, a tall figure with a distinctive scar across his right cheek, surveyed the town through binoculars. That's Emilio Vargas, Miguel whispered, recognizing the cartel lieutenant from intelligence briefings. Runs their northern corridor operations. Former Mexican Special Forces. Dangerous? Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. Very. Known for efficiency rather than brutality, but won't hesitate if crossed. Jack watched Vargas direct his men with hand signals, a clear pincer movement to secure the perimeter before entering the town proper. Professional. Methodical. These weren't street thugs, but trained operators. Throughout Independence, veterans remained perfectly concealed in pre-designated positions. Frank and his sniper team provided overwatch from carefully prepared hides. Dwayne's close-quarters specialists waited in reinforced buildings. Sarah had transformed the old bank vault into a medical station, prepared for any eventuality. After securing the perimeter, Vargas led his team into the town center, moving tactically from building to building. At the general store, which doubled as the veterans' community kitchen, they paused, noting the relatively good condition of the structure. This one's been maintained, Vargas observed in Spanish, running his hand along a recently replaced support beam. But no fresh food or supplies. Probably historical preservation volunteers who come monthly. Jack, listening through directional microphones, silently congratulated their preparation efforts. They carefully staged the town to appear occasionally maintained but not currently inhabited, removing or concealing all signs of daily occupation. For 2 hours, Vargas and his team methodically explored Independence, noting defensible positions and access routes. Occasionally, they would pause at some subtle inconsistency, a too-clean window, an oddly reinforced door, but never connected these anomalies into a pattern that might suggest occupation. Finally, Vargas returned to his vehicle and made a call. Jack, through Emily's signal interception, heard the confirmation, location secured. Proceed with delivery. Main force inbound. Jack relayed through their secure communication system. All teams maintain concealment. Observation only. The tension within Independence ratcheted higher as they waited. Veterans who had once held positions in Fallujah, Kandahar, and Mosul now employed those same skills in American territory, defending their home with the patience and discipline forged in distant wars. At 11:47, the rumble of heavy engines broke the desert silence. 3 large trucks and 6 motorcycle outriders approached from the south, maintaining tactical spacing. Unlike the advanced team's unmarked vehicles, these trucks had been modified for off-road performance with reinforced suspensions and run-flat tires. Jack observed the convoy through his scope, noting details. Lead and rear trucks appear to be security. Center truck likely contains cargo. Estimate 20 personnel total, heavily armed. The convoy rolled into town, dust billowing behind the vehicles. Under Vargas's direction, they established a perimeter, positioning motorcycles at key intersections while the trucks proceeded to the town center. What followed was a model of cartel efficiency. Security teams deployed in concentric rings around the central truck. Communications specialists established a temporary relay system. A generator hummed to life, powering equipment in the general store that was quickly converted to a command post. 2 hours into the operation, the central truck was finally opened. From his observation post, Jack couldn't see the contents, but Emily's directional microphone caught Vargas's satisfied tone. 40 million in product. Our biggest shipment yet. Jack felt Miguel tense beside him. Drugs. Some, certainly, Jack replied. But given current market values, that quantity suggests weapons or human trafficking components as well. The veterans of Independence had expected to observe a routine drug transportation operation. What they were witnessing was something far more significant, a major logistics hub being established in American territory. This changes things, Miguel whispered. If they're setting up permanent infrastructure here. Jack nodded grimly. We document everything, then contact Border Patrol. This is beyond what we anticipated. As evening approached, the cartel operation expanded. Solar generators were deployed. Sleeping arrangements established in the hotel. A sophisticated communications array erected beside the general store. This wasn't a one-night stopover, but the beginning of a permanent presence. In the church basement, Jack gathered the team leads for an emergency council. We're facing a Category 2 situation, he began, referencing their contingency planning. The cartel is establishing a forward operating base on American soil, right in our town. The veterans absorbed this with characteristic stoicism. Border Patrol response time? Dwayne asked. I made contact, Jack confirmed. They're coordinating with DEA and FBI for a joint operation, but timeline is 7,296 hours minimum due to the scale of what we've discovered. Frank swore softly. They'll be fully established by then. Exactly. Which means we need to adjust our strategy. Jack displayed the latest surveillance imagery. They're bringing in more equipment tomorrow, including defensive weaponry. Once that arrives, any intervention becomes significantly more dangerous. Sarah crossed her arms. You're suggesting we reveal ourselves before they're fully entrenched. I'm suggesting we have 3 options. Jack outlined each methodically. First, maintain concealment and wait for federal response, accepting that the cartel will be fully operational here for several days. Second, conduct a stealth evacuation tonight and abandon Independence temporarily. Third, implement a modified Operation Dusty Ghost to contain the situation until authorities arrive. Silence fell as each veteran weighed the implications. Their community, built painstakingly as a healing space for wounded warriors, now stood on the precipice of becoming a battleground once more. If we reveal ourselves, Miguel reasoned, we lose our greatest advantage. But if we wait, and they discover us after establishing defensive positions. It could be worse, Dwayne finished. Much worse. Jack let them debate, knowing this decision affected everyone in Independence. Finally, he called for a vote. The outcome was unanimous. Operation Dusty Ghost, modified for the current threat assessment, would commence at 0200 hours, when cartel vigilance would be at its lowest ebb. We're not looking for a direct confrontation, Jack emphasized as they finalized details. The objective is containment until Border Patrol arrives. We reveal enough of our presence to make them reconsider this location without forcing a firefight. As the meeting concluded, Sarah lingered behind. Jack, I know you're thinking about Ramadi. He looked up, slightly surprised. What makes you say that? Because I am too. Similar scenario. Outnumbered, waiting for backup, deciding whether to hold position or withdraw. She stepped closer. We lost good people making the wrong call then. Jack nodded. The memory's still sharp after all these years. Different situation now. We're defending our home, not holding arbitrary territory for political reasons. True. Sarah placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. Just make sure we're making this decision for the right reasons. Tactical necessity, not because we have something to prove. Her words stayed with him as midnight approached. Jack made final rounds of their defensive positions, checking in with each team. The veterans of Independence moved with practiced precision, preparing fallback positions, establishing communications redundancies, distributing medical supplies. In what had once been the town schoolhouse, Jack found Dwayne briefing his close-quarters team. The former SEAL had transformed the classroom into a tactical operations center, complete with building layouts and entry plans. All set? Jack asked from the doorway. Dwayne nodded. Ready when you are, Captain. He dismissed his team to make final preparations, then added quietly, though I'm still not convinced this is the right play. Jack respected Dwayne's caution. Explain. We have significant tactical advantages in our concealment and preparation, Dwayne reasoned. Revealing ourselves eliminates those advantages for uncertain gain. Valid concern, Jack acknowledged. But consider what happens if they discover us after bringing in their heavy equipment tomorrow. We'd face a significantly higher threat level with no additional resources. Dwayne weighed this, then nodded slowly. Preemptive action does give us the initiative. I just hope Border Patrol comes through on their timeline. So do I. Jack checked his watch. Get your people in position. 0200 comes quickly. Across Independence, similar conversations occurred as veterans prepared for their first real test since returning to civilian life. Some felt the familiar pre-mission tension, others a strange calm. All recognized the irony. They had come to this remote place seeking peace, only to find themselves once again standing between danger and the country they had sworn to protect. At 0145, Jack climbed the church tower for a final assessment. The cartel camp had settled into night routine, perimeter guards at predictable intervals, main force sleeping in designated buildings, communications center minimally staffed. Through thermal imaging, he counted 32 heat signatures throughout the town. Resources that would have overwhelmed a standard police response, but manageable for veterans with their specialized training and intimate knowledge of the terrain. His radio crackled softly. All teams in position, Miguel confirmed. Awaiting your order. Jack took a deep breath, centering himself. This wasn't Afghanistan or Iraq. This was American soil, their home. The decision weighed heavily, but the path forward was clear. Execute Operation Dusty Ghost, he ordered quietly. Phase 1 initiate. Across Independence, carefully prepared defensive systems activated simultaneously. Floodlights concealed on rooftops illuminated the town center, eliminating the cartel's night vision advantage. The public address system, installed during the town's restoration, crackled to life, broadcasting in Spanish and English. Attention unauthorized personnel. You have entered a restricted area. Law enforcement has been notified and is en route. Lay down your weapons and surrender peacefully. The effect was immediate. Cartel operatives scrambled from buildings, disoriented by the sudden light and sound. Perimeter guards rushed inward, abandoning their posts in confusion. Phase 2 commenced 60 seconds later. Strategically placed smoke generators activated, filling key streets with dense white smoke. Through his disorienting haze, veterans in full tactical gear became briefly visible at windows and rooftops before disappearing again, creating the impression of a much larger force. In the command center, Emilio Vargas barked orders, trying to regain control of his suddenly chaotic operation. Defensive Sit irons. Count of 3, then suppressing fire on the church tower. Jack, anticipating this response, had already relocated to his secondary position. When Cartel gunmen opened fire on the now empty church tower, they revealed their positions without hitting any targets. Phase 3 began precisely 2 minutes after initial contact. Miguel's engineering team remotely detonated small charges placed under the cartel vehicles, not enough to destroy them completely, but sufficient to disable engines and communications equipment. The coordinated response threw the cartel force into disarray. Trained for offensive operations against unarmed opponents or rival cartel members, they found themselves facing an invisible enemy with superior position knowledge and apparent tactical training. Vargas, however, was no amateur. He quickly reorganized his core team, establishing a defensive perimeter around the general store and dispatching scouts to probe potential enemy positions. Jack watched this response through thermal imaging, impressed despite himself. They're adapting quickly, implementing Phase 4. Phase 4 was the most psychologically sophisticated element of their plan. Using the town's restored electrical system, the veterans began systematically cutting power to different sections while activating it in others. Lights blinked on and off in seemingly random patterns throughout Independence, creating the impression of movement and activity far beyond their actual numbers. Simultaneously, recorded sounds played through hidden speakers, footsteps on wooden floors, radio communications, the metallic click of weapons being prepared. The cartel forces found themselves in a tactical hall of mirrors, unable to distinguish real threats from fabricated ones. 3 cartel scouts, moving to secure the livery stable, encountered the first actual resistance. Dwayne and 2 members of his close quarters team had established a blocking position, their weapons trained on the entrance. "Alto," Dwayne commanded in fluent Spanish. "Drop your weapons, or we will fire." The scouts hesitated, then raised their weapons. Dwayne's team fired first, precise shots that wounded rather than killed, rendering the scouts' combat ineffective without inflicting fatal injuries. Similar scenarios unfolded across Independence as cartel members encountered veterans defending strategic positions. The message was consistent: surrender or be neutralized, but no execution of those who surrendered. In the command center, Vargas assessed the deteriorating situation. Half his vehicles disabled, communications compromised, his force encountering resistance at every turn. Whatever they had stumbled into was far beyond the abandoned ghost town they'd expected. "Prepare for withdrawal," he ordered, pragmatism overcoming pride. "Secure the product and wounded. We'll regroup at secondary location." Jack, monitoring their communications, allowed himself a momentary sense of relief. The operation was working, creating sufficient pressure to force a cartel withdrawal without escalating to full-scale combat. But battlefield situations rarely proceed according to plan. As the cartel forces began their fighting retreat, one of their gunmen spotted Miguel adjusting a remote detonator on the roof of the hotel. A burst of automatic fire forced Miguel to take cover, but not before his position was compromised. "Contact, hotel roof," the gunman shouted. "They're up high." Vargas immediately redirected his forces, concentrating fire on the hotel. Miguel, pinned down behind an air conditioning unit, radioed urgently. "Heavy fire, can't retreat." Jack's relief evaporated. Overwatch team, suppressing fire on cartel positions near the hotel. Dwayne, extraction team to Miguel's position immediately. What had been a controlled operation suddenly teetered on the edge of becoming a firefight. Jack knew they needed to regain initiative quickly before the situation escalated beyond their ability to contain it. "Implement Contingency Echo," he ordered, referring to their emergency protocol for compromised operations. "All teams, execute now." Throughout Independence, veterans responded with the smooth coordination of those who had drilled for this exact scenario. Frank's sniper team delivered precision fire that disabled but didn't kill, shots that destroyed weapons or inflicted non-lethal wounds. Sarah's medical team moved into position to treat casualties on both sides. Dwayne led a 4-person team in a flanking maneuver to extract Miguel. Jack himself moved from his observation post into direct command position, recognizing that the operation had entered its most critical phase. As he reached the church's ground floor, the first cartel reinforcements arrived, motorcycles carrying additional gunmen, responding to Vargas's distress call. The quiet ghost town of Independence, built by veterans seeking peace, now echoed with the sounds they had traveled halfway around the world to escape. Yet this time, they fought not for distant political objectives, but for the home and community they had built together. The confrontation had begun. The moment the first shots rang out, Jack's world narrowed to tactical imperatives. The familiar rush of combat clarity, a state he hadn't experienced since his last deployment, swept through him, bringing with it a flood of muscle memory and instinctive calculations. Overwatch 1, status, he commanded into his radio, voice steady despite the escalating gunfire. 3 hostiles pinned behind the water trough, Frank reported from his sniper position. 2 more moving to flank east side of hotel. Miguel still pinned down on the roof. Jack moved swiftly through the church basement, retrieving his go bag with practiced efficiency. The ballistic vest felt like an old friend as he secured it over his chest. The weight of the sidearm at his hip completed a transformation he had hoped never to undergo again, from community leader back to combat operator. Dwayne? Position? Moving through the mine office toward hotel rear entrance. 90 seconds to Miguel's position. Jack studied the tactical display Emily had established. The cartel forces were regrouping around the general store, using vehicles for cover while maintaining suppressive fire on the hotel. Their motorcycle reinforcements had taken positions on the southern edge of town, cutting off the most obvious escape route. Sarah, medical status? Ready for casualties, she replied from the reinforced bank vault. 2 teams prepped for field extraction if needed. Jack made his decision. Execute Phase 5. Full defensive posture. Across Independence, concealed defensive systems activated. Metal shutters slid over critical windows. Prepositioned barriers rose from innocuous-looking garden boxes. The town's irrigation system, converted to deliver both water and defensive countermeasures, began pumping a mixture of water and CS irritant around the perimeter of cartel-occupied buildings. Remember, we're containing, not eliminating, Jack reminded his teams. Border Patrol, ETA, 22 hours. We hold until then. A sudden increase in gunfire drew his attention back to the tactical display. Vargas had organized a coordinated assault on the hotel, apparently recognizing it as a key defensive position. 3 teams moving simultaneously from different approaches, laying down suppressive fire while advancing in tactical formation. They're better than we anticipated, Miguel commented, his voice tight with tension as bullets impacted near his position. Jack's mind flashed back to urban combat training at Quantico. The instructors hammering home key principles: control the high ground, maintain multiple exit routes, never get fixed in position. Dwayne, adjustment to extraction plan, Jack ordered. Hotel becoming too hot. Implement fallback protocol Sierra. Get Miguel to secondary position via basement route. Copy that, Dwayne responded. Adjusting now. Jack turned to Emily, who was monitoring all communications. Give me everything on their tactical channels. I need to know their next move before they make it. As Emily worked her technical magic, Jack moved to the church tower for direct visual assessment. Staying carefully back from the windows, he surveyed the evolving battlefield. What he saw confirmed his suspicions. These cartel operators moved with military precision, clearing sectors methodically, maintaining disciplined fire control, adapting quickly to unexpected resistance. Not common criminals, but trained combatants who had brought their skills to criminal enterprise. A flash of movement caught his eye. Vargas himself, directing operations from behind an overturned truck. The cartel lieutenant was keeping his forces coordinated despite the confusion. A dangerous opponent. Jack's radio crackled with Dwayne's voice. Package secure. Moving to checkpoint Delta through underground route. Relief flooded through Jack. Miguel was safe. But the broader situation remained precarious. The cartel forces were adjusting to the veterans' tactics, probing for weaknesses, seeking patterns that would reveal the true nature of their opposition. A new sound cut through the gunfire, the distinctive thump of grenade launchers being prepared. Jack tensed. Military-grade weapons changed the calculus significantly. All teams, incoming explosives likely, he warned. Implement countermeasure Bravo. Throughout Independence, veterans activated pre-positioned smoke generators, obscuring sight lines and rendering grenade targeting less effective. Simultaneously, their audio system began broadcasting the recorded sounds of a helicopter approach, a psychological measure designed to suggest imminent law enforcement arrival. Jack watched Vargas react to the helicopter sound, scanning the sky before realizing the deception. The cartel lieutenant barked orders into his radio, his frustration evident even from a distance. 5 seconds later, the first grenade detonated against the hotel's eastern wall. The building, reinforced during the veterans' restoration work, held firm, but the message was clear. The conflict was escalating beyond what either side had initially prepared for. Jack knew he needed to regain initiative. Frank, implement Charlie maneuver. Target their communication equipment, not personnel. Frank acknowledged, and moments later, precision shots disabled the cartel's communications array. Additional rounds punctured vehicle tires and radiators, further limiting their mobility. But Vargas proved adaptable. Rather than continuing a direct assault, he ordered his forces to establish defensive positions while dispatching runners to their vehicle convoy. Jack watched through binoculars as they retrieved heavy cases from the trucks, reinforcements in both equipment and possibly personnel. We need more information, Jack decided. Emily, deploy surveillance drone from eastern position. The small, nearly silent drone launched from a concealed position in the old schoolhouse, providing an overhead view of the cartel operation. The footage confirmed Jack's concerns. They were unpacking additional weapons, including what appeared to be a .50 caliber machine gun with anti-material capability. This is beyond our containment parameters, Jack acknowledged grimly. Time for Contingency Omega. Contingency Omega was their most aggressive defensive protocol, designed for situations where they faced superior firepower. It prioritized neutralizing key enemy capabilities through precisely coordinated action. All team leads, prepare for synchronized implementation of Omega on my mark, Jack ordered. 3-minute countdown. As the veterans made final preparations, Jack's mind flashed back to his last combat deployment in Afghanistan. Their forward operating base had been surrounded by Taliban forces with superior numbers. That night had tested everything he'd learned about defensive operations and leadership under fire. The memory triggered a sudden insight. Emily, pull up thermal imaging of the area behind the general store. The infrared feed revealed what conventional surveillance had missed. The cartel had positioned their most valuable cargo in a reinforced case behind the building, guarded by their elite personnel. Whatever they were protecting represented their primary mission objective. Adjustment to Omega, Jack decided. Primary target is now the secured package behind the general store. Frank, your team will provide precision fire to separate guards from package. Dwayne, your team will execute rapid acquisition once guards are displaced. Risk assessment? Dwayne asked pragmatically. High, Jack admitted. But if we secure their primary objective, we gain significant leverage. The team acknowledged the updated plan. Jack checked his watch 2 minutes to synchronization. He used the time to review the tactical display once more, looking for anything they might have missed. A movement pattern caught his attention. Cartel forces shifting position in a distinctive formation. He'd seen it before in urban combat scenarios. They were preparing for a bulldozer approach, concentrated force against a single point to break through defensive layers. They're targeting the church, he realized. They've identified our command center. Jack keyed his radio. Change of plans. Church position compromised. I'm relocating command to fallback Alpha. Emily, Initiate data purge and proceed to secondary position. As Emily quickly wiped their tactical systems, Jack gathered essential equipment. The sound of approaching footsteps on the church's wooden floors confirmed his assessment. They had minutes, perhaps seconds, before the cartel forces breached their position. Go now, he ordered Emily, guiding her toward the concealed exit behind the altar. I'll cover and follow. She hesitated. The equipment is replaceable. You're not. Jack positioned himself at the doorway, weapon ready. Go. As Emily disappeared through the hidden passage, Jack prepared for a fighting retreat. The church had been their first restoration project in independence, symbolic of the new beginning they'd sought here. Now it would become a battlefield. The door at the base of the tower splintered under concentrated fire. Jack responded with controlled bursts, not aiming to kill but to delay, to buy precious seconds for Emily's escape and the implementation of their contingency plan. A fragmentation grenade bounced through the broken door. Jack dove behind the heavy altar, shielded from the worst of the blast by the reinforced wood. His ears rang as he rolled to a firing position, engaging the first cartel gunman to enter. 2 went down with non-lethal wounds to their extremities. The third retreated, shouting for backup. Jack used the momentary reprieve to make his own exit, slipping through the concealed passage and sealing it behind him. The narrow tunnel, originally a priest's escape route during frontier conflicts, led to the livery stable 50 meters away. Jack moved quickly through the darkness, guided by memory and the faint emergency lighting they'd installed during renovation. His radio buzzed with static before Frank's voice broke through. Command, be advised. Heavy assault on church position. At least 8 hostiles. I'm clear, Jack confirmed, emerging into the stable's hidden cellar. Proceed with Omega. New command position establishing at fallback Alpha. He climbed the ladder to the stable's main floor, where Dwayne and 2 team members waited with Miguel. Good to see you in one piece, Dwayne said, handing Jack a replacement radio. Though you cut it close. Tactical necessity, Jack replied, checking his gear. Status on Omega preparations? Ready on your command. All teams in position. Jack nodded and keyed the radio. All units, execute Omega. Now. Across Independence, the veterans' coordinated defense plan activated simultaneously. Frank's sniper team engaged the cartel forces with precise fire, targeting weapons and equipment rather than personnel. Sarah's medical team used their protected routes to retrieve wounded from both sides, providing treatment without discrimination. Most importantly, Dwayne's assault team initiated their rapid acquisition operation, using the distraction of the church assault to approach the cartel's secured package from an unexpected direction, through underground maintenance tunnels that had once connected key buildings in the mining town. CK monitored their progress from the new command position established in the old assay office, a building the cartel had dismissed as structurally unsound during their initial survey. In reality, it contained some of their most sophisticated surveillance equipment, concealed behind crumbling facades. Approaching target, Dwayne reported, his voice a controlled whisper. For guards, heavily armed. Package appears to be a reinforced case, approximately 1 meter by 1/2 meter. Proceed according to plan, Jack authorized. Non-lethal approach, if possible. What followed was a textbook example of close-quarters combat techniques. Dwayne's team deployed flashbang grenades, temporarily disorienting the guards. They followed with immediate physical neutralization, precise strikes to render opponents unconscious or combat ineffective without permanent injury. Package secured. Dwayne confirmed 43 seconds later. Returning via Route Charlie. Jack allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before refocusing on the broader tactical situation. The cartel forces, realizing they'd lost their primary objective, would escalate significantly. Vargas wouldn't accept such a failure. All units be advised, Jack warned. Expect maximum response within 3 minutes. Full defensive posture. He turned to Miguel, who was monitoring their perimeter sensors. How many points of failure in our defensive network? None that they've identified, Miguel replied, studying the displays. But they're probing systematically. It's only a matter of time. Jack nodded grimly. We need to know what we're defending. He keyed his radio. Dwayne, what's in the package? A pause before Dwayne's response. You need to see this yourself. Implications are significant. 3 minutes later, Dwayne's team arrived at the command center through their concealed route network. The reinforced case, now secured with additional restraints, was placed carefully on the central table. Biometric lock with explosive failsafe, Dwayne explained, pointing to the sophisticated security mechanism. Military grade, not something typically used for drug shipments. Jack examined the case without touching it. Options. We've disabled the explosive component, Miguel said, indicating where they'd inserted a dampening device between the lock and the detonator. But forcing it open still risks damaging the contents. Jack weighed their options. The case clearly contained something of extraordinary value to the cartel, perhaps intelligence, financial data, or weapons technology. Whatever it was, it represented leverage they hadn't anticipated. Secure it in Vault 3, he decided. Maximum protection protocol. Then prepare for their response. The cartel's reaction came swiftly and with greater force than even Jack had anticipated. Vargas, discovering the loss of their package, ordered a full offensive deployment. The sound of concentrated gunfire erupted from multiple directions simultaneously. They're hitting all primary structures, Frank reported from his overwatch position. Coordinated assault on 8 points. Jack studied the tactical display showing heat signatures converging on their positions. They're searching systematically. They know we're here in force now, not just a security team. Miguel looked up from the communications monitor. They've called for reinforcements. Intercepted transmissions indicate at least 20 additional personnel en route. ETA 90 minutes. Jack absorbed this information with the calm focus that had kept him alive through 4 combat deployments. That changes our timeline. Border Patrol is still 18 hours out minimum. We need to adjust strategy. The immediate decision was clear. They couldn't maintain their current defensive posture against reinforced cartel numbers. But abandoning independence wasn't an option either. Not with what they now possessed. We shift to asymmetric response, Jack decided. Ghost team deployment. Make them chase shadows while we consolidate our actual defensive positions. The veterans had prepared for this contingency, using their intimate knowledge of Independence's layout to create the impression of a much larger force. Remote-controlled speakers simulating movement. Thermal decoys generating false heat signatures. Pre-positioned devices that mimicked muzzle flashes and weapon discharges. Emily, initiate deception protocol Sierra, Jack ordered. Full spectrum deployment. As Emily activated their deception systems, Jack gathered his team, leads for rapid planning. We have 80 minutes to transform our defensive posture. Primary objective is now asset protection until Border Patrol arrival. He outlined their adjusted strategy, consolidating to 3 hardened positions with overlapping fields of fire, connected by their concealed tunnel network. Minimum personnel exposure, maximum use of remote systems. Frank, your teams will provide overwatch from positions Bravo and Echo. Dwayne, your close quarters specialist will defend the primary vault. Miguel, I need your expertise on our remaining remote detonation systems. The veterans moved with practiced efficiency, implementing the new defensive plan while maintaining pressure on cartel forces through their deception network. It was a strategy born of necessity. They were outnumbered and would soon face even greater disadvantage. Jack himself conducted a final inspection of their primary fallback position, the reinforced mine office that had been converted into a combination command center and medical station. Sarah had already established her equipment there, prepared for the likelihood of increased casualties. How are our patients? Jack asked, noting the 3 cartel members receiving treatment alongside one of their own veterans who had suffered a shrapnel wound. Stable, Sarah replied professionally. The cartel fighters are secured but receiving appropriate care. Jack nodded approval. Even in combat, certain principles remained inviolable, proper treatment of wounded being foremost among them. A sudden explosion from the direction of the general store interrupted their conversation. Jack moved quickly to the observation point, surveying the aftermath through his scope. Vargas had ordered explosive charges placed against supporting walls, a demolition technique designed to clear the building systematically. They were no longer searching but destroying, eliminating potential hiding places with overwhelming force. "They're getting desperate," Miguel observed, joining Jack at the window. "That's good and bad for us." Jack understood the double-edged implication. Desperate opponents made mistakes but also became more dangerous, more willing to employ extreme measures. His radio crackled with Frank's voice. Vehicle approaching from the south. Not cartel pattern. Civilian truck, single occupant. Jack felt a chill of concern. Border residents. They must have heard the gunfire. They'll drive straight into the cartel perimeter, Miguel realized. 3 minutes at current speed. Jack made an immediate decision. "Frank, can you disable their vehicle from your position? Non-threatening shots, radiator or tires only." "Affirmative. Range 900 meters. Wind minimal." "Take the shot. Then we extract the civilian." Frank acknowledged, and seconds later reported success. Vehicle disabled 1 kilometer from town perimeter. Driver appears unharmed, but confused. Jack turned to Dwayne. "I need a 2-person team for civilian extraction. Quick and quiet." "I'll handle it personally," Dwayne volunteered, already checking his gear. Williams will accompany. As Dwayne departed on his rescue mission, Jack returned his attention to the cartel forces systematically destroying buildings in their search. Their tactical approach suggested growing frustration, less precision, more brute force. Jack's mind returned to his urban combat training. One principle stood paramount: control the tempo. Force the opponent to react rather than act. The time had come to seize initiative. "Miguel, status on our remaining remote systems?" 6 charges still operational at key junctions. 3 drone swarm units ready. Irrigation system at 80% capacity with irritant mixture prepared. Jack considered their options, formulating a response that would disrupt the cartel operation without endangering their own consolidated positions. "Implement disruption sequence alpha," he ordered. "Timed intervals, beginning with the furthest charges from civilian structures." Miguel nodded understanding and began the programming sequence. The plan was precisely calibrated, using their remaining remote demolition charges not for maximum damage but strategic disorientation. Each detonation would trigger approximately 60 seconds after the previous, drawing cartel forces in predictable directions while the veterans remained secure in their hardened positions. Jack keyed his radio. "All teams, prepare for disruption sequence alpha. Maintain discipline and position regardless of what you observe. Remember, we're creating the illusion of counterattack while actually consolidating defense." The first charge detonated precisely on schedule, collapsing an already partially damaged section of the hotel's eastern wing. Cartel forces responded predictably, redirecting attention and firepower toward the apparent attack. 2 seconds later, the second charge activated, this time near the livery stable where several cartel vehicles were parked. The blast disabled 2 motorcycles without risking a fuel tank explosion, further dividing the cartel's response team. "They're splitting forces," Frank reported from his overwatch position. 3 teams moving in different directions. Vargas remaining in central position with 6 guards. Jack watched the thermal signatures disperse across Independence. The cartel lieutenant was maintaining a strategic reserve around himself, a professional response, but one that further divided his effective force. The third and fourth charges continued the pattern, creating the impression of a coordinated counterattack from multiple directions. In reality, not a single veteran had left their defensive positions. The deception was working. "Dwayne, status on civilian extraction?" Jack checked, aware that this operation represented their greatest current vulnerability. "Contact made." Local rancher investigating gunfire. Bringing him in via Route Echo. ETA 7 minutes to secure zone. Jack acknowledged, relieved that an innocent bystander wouldn't be caught in the increasingly destructive conflict. The fifth charge, smaller but strategically placed beneath a water tower, created a convincing distraction as the pressurized tank released its contents in a dramatic cascade. Cartel forces, now thoroughly disoriented, fired wildly at perceived threats that existed only as shadows and noise. Final phase, Jack ordered. Miguel, deploy drone swarm. Pattern Omega. 3 small drones, barely larger than birds, launched from concealed positions around Independence. Unlike military combat drones, these carried no weapons, only speakers broadcasting recorded sounds of movement and tactical communications, along with simple light packages that simulated muzzle flashes when triggered. The cumulative psychological effect on the cartel forces was evident in their increasingly disorganized response. Teams fired at phantom targets. Communication broke down as different groups reported contacts that didn't exist. The careful military discipline Vargas had maintained began to fracture under the strain of fighting an enemy they couldn't locate or quantify. Jack monitored their communications through Emily's interception system, noting the growing confusion and frustration in their exchanges. Even Vargas, previously calm and methodical, showed signs of strain as he attempted to regain control of his scattered forces. "They're breaking," Miguel observed. Tactical cohesion degrading rapidly. Jack nodded but remained cautious, which makes them more dangerous in some ways. Watch for indiscriminate fire or desperate measures. His concern proved prescient. Minutes later, cartel forces began employing incendiary devices against buildings they couldn't clear, choosing destruction over careful searching. Flames rose from the general store and hotel, structures the veterans had spent months carefully restoring. Fire suppressant systems active in primary structures, Miguel reported, activating the defensive measures they'd integrated during renovation. Limited effectiveness given damage levels. Buildings are lost. Jack accepted this with stoic pragmatism. Buildings could be rebuilt. Lives couldn't be replaced. A new transmission cut through the cartel's tactical channel. Their reinforcements had arrived at the designated rendezvous point 5 kilometers south of Independence. 20 additional fighters with heavier weapons, including what sounded like vehicle-mounted machine guns. "That's our critical threshold," Jack acknowledged. "Time for final defensive consolidation." He issued rapid orders, instructing all teams to withdraw to their 3 hardened positions connected by the underground network. They would abandon the deception strategy and focus entirely on protecting their personnel and the secured package until Border Patrol arrived. As his veterans executed the careful withdrawal, Jack found himself facing the same tactical dilemma he'd encountered in distant combat zones: the balance between mission objectives and personnel safety. In Afghanistan, abstract strategic goals had sometimes demanded unacceptable risks. Here in Independence, the calculation was clearer. Their people came first. All personnel accounted for, Frank confirmed as the last team reached secure positions, including our civilian guest and 3 wounded cartel prisoners. Jack acknowledged this, then turned to Emily. "Status on Border Patrol response. Latest update confirms Joint Task Force en route," she reported. "Helicopter assets launching within the hour. Ground forces still 15 hours out minimum." Jack processed this information, mentally calculating ammunition reserves, medical supplies, and defensive capabilities against the expanded cartel force. The situation was deteriorating, but not unsalvageable. They had survived worse odds in more hostile environments. A massive explosion rocked the eastern edge of town, far larger than their controlled demolition charges. The shock wave rattled windows even in their reinforced position. "What was that?" Jack demanded, moving quickly to the observation point. Miguel checked the sensor network. Cartel forces detonated something at the mine entrance. Significant explosive yield, military grade, not improvised. Frank's voice came through the radio. tense but controlled. Be advised, they're bringing up their heavy weapons. 50 cal mounted on a technical. Approaching from South Road. Jack's tactical calculations shifted immediately. A .50 caliber machine gun would penetrate most of their defensive positions, even with the reinforcement work they'd done during renovation. Only the original bank vault and mine office had sufficient protection against such firepower. Consolidate to positions 1 and 3 only, he ordered. Abandon position 2. Move all personnel and prisoners now. As his teams executed the order, Jack consulted the structural diagrams Miguel had prepared during their renovation. The mine office where they had established their command post featured reinforced concrete walls, originally designed to protect mining company records from frontier bandits. The bank vault similarly offered exceptional protection, but between these positions stretched 70 meters of vulnerability, space the cartel's heavy machine gun could cover effectively, cutting off movement between their secure locations. We need to neutralize that 50 cal before reinforcements arrive in force, Jack decided. Direct assault too risky. Need alternative approach. His mind raced through options, discarding those with unacceptable risk profiles or low probability of success. Then he remembered a tactical solution from his force recon days, a technique they'd employed against Taliban heavy weapons positions and mountain passes. Miguel, do we still have access to the water pressure system for the east side of town? Miguel checked the control panel. Affirmative. 80% capacity remaining. And the remaining CS irritant mixture? Approximately 15 gallons concentrated solution. Jack nodded, a plan forming. Here's what we're going to do. He outlined a coordinated operation combining their remaining resources, the pressurized water system, riot control chemical, and precision fire from Frank's team. It was a variation on a technique they'd used to disable entrenched machine gun positions without direct assault, using pressurized delivery of disorienting agents followed by precision disabling shots. Timing has to be perfect, Jack emphasized. The technical crew will only be vulnerable for seconds. Frank acknowledged from his position. We'll make it count. Preparations moved with practiced efficiency, Miguel programming the water delivery system to concentrated burst mode, Sarah preparing additional medical resources for potential casualties. Dwayne organizing a recovery team if the opportunity presented itself. Jack received confirmation from all positions. Execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1 mark. The operation unfolded with precision born of military training and shared combat experience. The water system activated, delivering a pressurized spray of CS irritant directly onto the cartel technical position. Simultaneously, Frank's sniper team engaged with carefully placed shots, not targeting personnel, but disabling the heavy weapons firing mechanism and mounting system. The cartel gunners, caught in the chemical spray, abandoned their position temporarily, enough time for Frank to render the .50 caliber inoperable with systematic shots to critical components. Weapon neutralized, Frank confirmed. Technical retreating to cartel main position. Jack allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before refocusing on their situation. They had eliminated the most serious immediate threat, but the broader tactical picture remained challenging. Cartel reinforcements were minutes away. Their own ammunition wasn't infinite, and the fires spreading through Independence threatened to create additional hazards. Yet as he surveyed their defense plans one more time, Jack felt something unexpected, a sense of rightness. Here in this desert ghost town, far from the foreign battlefields where they'd honed their skills, his team of veterans had found both purpose and healing. They fought not for abstract geopolitical objectives, but for home, for each other, for the community they had built together. All teams, status report, he requested, voice steady. The responses came back quickly. All personnel secure, defenses holding, wounded stable. They had withstood the initial cartel assault and adapted effectively to escalating threats. Now came the ultimate test, endurance until federal forces arrived. Jack turned to the secure case they had captured, the object valuable enough to provoke this level of cartel response. Whatever it contained represented both danger and opportunity. But that mystery would wait. For now, their focus remained absolute: survive, protect, endure. Outside their fortified positions, independence burned, buildings painstakingly restored now consumed by flames. Yet Jack found himself strangely untroubled by the destruction of physical structures. The town's true value lay not in its buildings, but in the community that had found healing within its boundaries. That could not be destroyed by fire or bullets. As night fell over the contested ghost town, both defenders and attackers prepared for the next phase of conflict. Jack Harmon, once a Marine Force recon officer leading troops in distant lands, now commanded a different kind of unit. Wounded warriors who had found purpose in protecting a piece of American soil they called home. The cartel had expected an empty ghost town. Instead, they had found veterans waiting in every building. The challenge had been issued and met. Now came the revelation of what these former warriors could truly accomplish when defending what mattered most. The darkness brought a deceptive quiet to independence. Flames from burning buildings cast shifting shadows across the contested ground, creating a hellscape reminiscent of war zones half a world away. Jack stood at the reinforced observation window of the mine office, surveying what remained of the town they'd painstakingly rebuilt. "Status report," he requested, voice low. Miguel consulted their monitoring systems. Cartel forces have established a perimeter around the town center. 28 signatures visible on thermal. Their reinforcements have arrived. I count 4 vehicles with mounted positions and approximately 18 additional personnel. Jack absorbed this information with the detached calculation of a combat veteran. And our people? All accounted for. Frank's team is maintaining overwatch from Position 1. Dwayne has security established for Position 3. Sarah reports all wounded are stable. Emily looked up from her communication station. Border Patrol confirms helicopter assets launching within 30 minutes. ETA to our position roughly 2 hours. Ground forces still 12 hours out minimum. Jack checked his watch. 2,217 hours. 2 more hours of holding their positions against increasingly superior numbers. The tactical math was unforgiving. "And our guest?" Jack asked, referring to the rancher they'd extracted. "Mr. Townsend is secure with Sarah's team," Miguel reported. Understandably shaken, but cooperating fully. Jack nodded, then turned his attention to the secured case they'd captured, the object that had transformed a routine cartel operation into a bitter siege. "Time to find out what we're actually fighting over." Miguel approached with their improvised disarming kit. The case's biometric lock had been neutralized, but the secondary security systems remained active. With methodical precision, Miguel bypassed each one, his expertise in demolitions proving invaluable for the reverse process of disarming rather than arming explosive components. "Almost there," he murmured, concentrating on delicate connections. Final failsafe, neutralized. The case's locking mechanism released with an audible click. Jack and Miguel exchanged glances, then carefully opened the reinforced lid. Inside, nestled in custom-molded foam, lay 3 objects: a hardened laptop computer, a set of data drives, and a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be documents with official markings. "Not drugs," Miguel observed unnecessarily. "Intelligence," Jack concluded, examining the contents without touching them. "Question is, what kind and whose?" Emily joined them, her background in signals intelligence immediately relevant. Military-grade encryption on the hardware, based on the security markings. Those documents appear to have Mexican government seals. Jack carefully extracted one document using a pencil through the binding ring, minimizing contact. The header confirmed Emily's assessment: official Mexican military intelligence markings, along with classification indicators and what appeared to be personnel records. Identities, Jack realized, scanning the contents. Names, locations, operational details of deep cover agents within cartel organizations. Miguel let out a low whistle. Mexican intelligence operatives embedded in the cartels. No wonder they were willing to burn down our town to get this back. Not just Mexican intelligence, Emily added, pointing to markings on another document. Some of these are joint operations. DEA, CIA involvement indicated. The implications were immediately clear. The cartel hadn't been transporting drugs or weapons through Independence. They'd intercepted a high-value intelligence package that could compromise government operations throughout Mexico and the borderlands. The information likely identified undercover agents, safe houses, and operational details that would sign death warrants for dozens of intelligence operatives if it reached cartel leadership. This changes everything, Jack said, carefully returning the document to its portfolio. We're not just protecting our town anymore. We're preventing a catastrophic intelligence breach. Miguel nodded grimly, and explaining why Vargas brought military-grade weapons and explosives for what should have been a routine transit operation. Jack's training in operational security immediately kicked in. Secure these materials for transport. When Border Patrol arrives, we hand this directly to the senior federal officer, no exceptions. As Miguel and Emily secured the intelligence materials, Jack reassessed their tactical situation with fresh perspective. The cartel forces wouldn't retreat, not with this prize at stake. And they would become increasingly desperate as time passed, potentially employing extreme measures to recover the compromised intelligence. We need to adjust our defensive posture, Jack decided. They'll hit us with everything they have before federal assets arrive. He gathered his team leads via secure communication, outlining what they discovered and the elevated stakes of their situation. We're holding information that could get dozens of undercover agents killed. That means we hold until relieved, no matter the cost. The veterans acknowledged this with the grave understanding of those who had faced similar choices on distant battlefields. Sometimes the mission demanded extraordinary sacrifice. This time, at least, the cause was unambiguously just. Jack outlined, in their adjusted defensive strategy, centered around protecting the intelligence materials while maintaining maximum flexibility against superior forces. We implement scorched earth protocol. Prepare for building-by-building defense with fallback positions predetermined. Scorched earth, a defensive strategy they had developed for worst-case scenarios, leveraging their intimate knowledge of Independence's structural vulnerabilities. Every building had been mapped, reinforcement points identified, defensive firing positions established. They would contest every meter of ground, making the cartel pay dearly for each advance. Even as they finalized preparations, the cartel made its first probing attack. 2 3-man teams approached the southern perimeter, testing defensive responses. Frank's Overwatch team engaged selectively, forcing them back without revealing all firing positions. They're establishing our perimeter, Jack observed, watching thermal signatures retreat to cartel lines. Mapping fields of fire. Miguel nodded. Professional approach. Systematic. They'll come in force next, Jack predicted. 20 minutes at most. He wasn't wrong. 19 minutes later, the cartel launched a coordinated assault from 3 directions simultaneously. Vehicles with mounted weapons provided suppressive fire while infantry teams advanced in tactical formation, using smoke grenades to mask their movement. All teams, selective engagement, Jack ordered. Conservation of ammunition priority. Make every shot count. The veterans responded with disciplined efficiency, choosing targets carefully and maintaining communication throughout the defensive network. Where the cartel employed overwhelming firepower, the defenders countered with precision and superior position knowledge. 3 cartel fighters went down in the initial exchange, wounded rather than killed by the veterans' measured response. The attackers withdrew to covered positions, recalibrating their approach after meeting unexpected resistance. They're adjusting, Miguel noted, watching thermal signatures regroup behind the remains of the general store. Bringing up heavier weapons. Jack acknowledged this with a grim nod. The tactical situation was following predictable escalation patterns: probe, assault, Escalate. Repeat. The cartel would keep increasing pressure until they broke through or exhausted their resources. Time to implement Deception Phase 2, he decided. Deception Phase 2 activated their most sophisticated countermeasures, systems designed to create confusion about the defenders' true numbers and positions. Pre-recorded tactical communications broadcast through concealed speakers. Remote-triggered muzzle flashes from abandoned positions. Thermal decoys mimicking human heat signatures. The veterans had spent months integrating these systems throughout Independence, drawing on hard-learned lessons from combat zones where they'd faced superior numbers. Now those preparations paid dividends as cartel forces adjusted their assault to target phantom defenders. "They're splitting forces again," Frank reported from his overwatch position. Taking the bait. Jack watched the thermal display as cartel teams divided, pursuing illusory targets while exposing their actual positions to the veterans' coordinated fire. It was a temporary advantage. Eventually, they would recognize the deception, but every minute gained brought federal reinforcement closer. Vargas, however, proved more adaptable than anticipated. Even as his teams pursued phantom defenders, he held his core force in reserve, studying the pattern of responses. Jack recognized the approach, a combat leader identifying the reality beneath the chaos. "He's figuring it out," Jack warned his team. "Prepare for concentrated assault on Position 1. Minutes later, Vargas committed his reserve force in a direct attack on Frank's overwatch position. 3 teams moving simultaneously with covered approaches, while mounted weapons delivered suppressive fire to pin defenders inside. "Fall back to secondary position," Jack ordered Frank's team. "Controlled withdrawal." Frank acknowledged, initiating the rehearsed evacuation through concealed routes as cartel forces breached the building's outer defenses. The veterans moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving critical equipment before disappearing into hidden passageways moments before attackers reached their former positions. Position 1 compromised, Frank confirmed, his team regrouping at their secondary location. All personnel accounted for. Minimal equipment loss. Jack updated their tactical display, tracking cartel movements as they secured the abandoned position. "They'll recognize it as a command post. That buys us time while they search for intelligence." The veteran strategy unfolded as planned, sacrificing physical territory while preserving personnel and critical resources. It was a calculated exchange, trading space for time in the classic defensive formula. But the cartel's assault intensified as Vargas committed more resources to the search. Buildings that had withstood a century of desert weathering succumbed to concentrated weapons fire and demolition charges. The town of Independence, painstakingly restored by wounded warriors seeking peace, disintegrated under the onslaught. Jack felt a pang watching structures collapse. Homes they had rebuilt board by board, spaces where healing had begun for traumatized veterans. Yet the community itself remained intact, adapting to circumstances with the resilience forged in distant combat. "They're bringing up vehicle-mounted spotlights," Miguel reported as cartel forces continued their systematic advance. "Eliminating shadow concealment." Jack nodded, already formulating countermeasures. "Implement Talon Protocol." Talon Protocol, their contingency for operations under illumination, activated immediately. Veterans equipped with modified night vision devices gained advantage as cartel spotlights created harsh contrast between illuminated areas and shadows. Frank's sniper team systematically eliminated light sources with precision fire, while other defenders used the momentary blindness caused by shifting illumination to relocate between positions. The tactical give-and-take continued for 47 minutes, cartel forces advancing meter by meter while the veterans contested every movement. Both sides demonstrated professional discipline, employing sophisticated combat techniques rather than chaotic firefights. Jack monitored the evolving battlefield from their secondary command post, adjusting defensive posture as cartel tactics shifted. He recognized Vargas's approach, methodical pressure applied with increasing intensity, probing for weakness while preserving core assets. It was how Jack himself might have conducted such an operation. "They're consolidating for another push," Miguel observed, studying thermal signatures regrouping behind the remains of the hotel. "Concentrating forces this time, not splitting teams." Jack checked their tactical overlay. "They've identified our fallback pattern. Next assault will target Position 3 directly." The implications were immediate. Position 3 housed their medical station, the captured intelligence materials, and their civilian guest. If it fell, both mission and personnel would be compromised. "Time to show them what we're really capable of," Jack decided. "Implement Thunder Run." Thunder Run, the veterans' most aggressive countermeasure, reserved for situations where defensive posture alone proved insufficient. Not a retreat, but a limited offensive operation, designed to disrupt enemy coordination and create tactical breathing room. "Dwayne, your team has point," Jack ordered. "Frank provides overwatch. Miguel, preparatory detonations on my mark." The veterans moved with practiced synchronization, each element understanding its role within the coordinated action. Miguel's final remote charges activated simultaneously, not at CA. Retell positions directly, but it carefully selected structural points that dropped debris between enemy teams, temporarily isolating their forward elements from support. In the momentary confusion, Dwayne's close-quarters team executed their operation with flawless precision. Moving through concealed approaches, they emerged behind Cartel forward positions, neutralizing communications specialists and command elements before the main force could respond effectively. Command and control elements suppressed, Dwayne reported 90 seconds later. 3 prisoners secured. Withdrawing to primary position. Jack watched the thermal display as Dwayne's team disappeared into pre-designated extraction routes, leaving disoriented Cartel fighters without coordinated leadership. The Thunder Run had achieved its objective, disrupting the enemy's assault preparation while demonstrating capabilities they hadn't anticipated. But Vargas remained adaptable. Even with communications disrupted and forward elements isolated, he adjusted quickly, establishing secondary command points and resuming tactical coordination through alternative channels. "He's good," Jack acknowledged, respecting the Cartel lieutenant's professionalism despite their opposition. Former Special Forces training evident in his response patterns. The tactical exchange continued with increasing intensity as Cartel forces recovered from the Thunder Run disruption. They adjusted their approach, employing wider dispersal with multiple smaller teams rather than concentrated force, a textbook response to the threat of additional counterattacks. Jack recognized the evolving situation with clinical detachment. The Cartel's adaptability meant conventional defensive tactics would eventually prove insufficient against their superior numbers and resources. "Time for an asymmetric approach." "Emily, status on weather conditions?" he asked. Emily consulted her monitoring systems. Barometric pressure dropping rapidly. Desert thermal front approaching from the southwest. Likely dust storm conditions within 20 minutes. Jack nodded, a plan forming. Desert veterans knew that rapid temperature changes could create sudden, violent dust storms that transformed visibility and tactical conditions instantly. They had prepared for this environmental factor during Independence's restoration, integrating specialized equipment and protocols for desert storm operations. "All teams, prepare for Operation Sandman," he ordered. "Full protective gear and enhanced communication protocols. Coordinate through subsonic channels only." Operation Sandman leveraged natural environmental conditions as a force multiplier, using the approaching dust storm to neutralize the Cartel's advantages in numbers and firepower while maximizing the veterans' specialized training and equipment. The veterans moved with swift efficiency, donning PR. Protective gear designed for desert storm conditions, specialized breathing apparatus, thermal imaging that functioned through particulate matter, communication systems operating below the storm's acoustic threshold. Equipment developed for military operations in Middle Eastern dust storms, now deployed in the American Southwest. As predicted, the storm arrived with sudden violence. visibility dropping from kilometers to meters in minutes as howling winds drove sand and debris through Independence. Cartel operations immediately faltered, their standard equipment insufficient for such conditions. "Execute Sandman Phase 2, Jack ordered, watching thermal signatures of cartel forces struggling to maintain cohesion in the blinding storm. The veterans activated their most sophisticated advantage, navigation systems mapped to Independence's precise layout, allowing movement through zero visibility conditions with confidence. While cartel forces hunkered down or withdrew to vehicles, the defenders moved freely through the maelstrom, repositioning assets and establishing new defensive perimeters. Jack himself led a small team to recover critical equipment from compromised positions, moving through the storm like ghosts while cartel forces fired blindly at imagined threats. The psychological impact was calculated and effective. The sudden environmental shift combined with the defenders' continued operation created an impression of supernatural capability. Position 4 established, Jack confirmed, his team securing equipment in their new location. All critical assets relocated. The storm raged for 22 minutes, brief by meteorological standards, but an eternity in tactical timelines. When visibility gradually returned, the battlefield had transformed. Veterans occupied entirely new positions unknown to the attackers. Defensive preparations that had taken months to establish were now deployed in configurations the cartel hadn't mapped or anticipated. Vargas, recognizing the significant tactical shift, ordered his forces to regroup and reassess. The systematic advance halted as cartel teams attempted to re-establish situational awareness in the reconfigured battle space. "They're hesitating," Miguel observed, monitoring thermal signatures from their new command position. "Uncertain of our disposition." Jack nodded. "Time to press the advantage. Implement Phantom Protocol." Phantom Protocol, their most sophisticated psychological operation, designed to create the impression of overwhelming force through coordinated deception. Veterans activated remaining remote systems simultaneously, muzzle flashes from multiple positions, recorded tactical communications suggesting numerous teams, thermal decoys simulating squad movements through obscured terrain. The cumulative effect on cartel forces was evident in their response. Hasty defensive positions established, overlapping fields of fire oriented outward rather than toward the town center. The psychological initiative had shifted completely. Emily's voice cut through the tactical focus. "Border Patrol confirms helicopter assets 15 minutes out. 2 UH-60s with tactical teams inbound." Jack acknowledged this with subdued satisfaction. Federal reinforcement would arrive before ammunition reserves reached critical levels. But 15 minutes remained an eternity in combat conditions, particularly if the cartel made a desperate final push to recover their compromised intelligence. "They'll detect the helicopters on approach," Jack reasoned. "Vargas will recognize his window closing." Miguel nodded agreement. "Maximum effort incoming. They need that intelligence package more than they need independence." Jack studied their tactical display, calculating probable assault vectors and response options. Final defensive posture. All teams consolidate at Position 4. Resource conservation absolute priority. Position 4, the Old Bank Vault, their most heavily reinforced location and current housing for the captured intelligence materials. The veterans executed the consolidation with practiced efficiency, moving through concealed routes to establish their final defensive perimeter. Jack joined them 6 minutes later, having confirmed all other positions evacuated and secured. Inside the reinforced vault, Sarah had established her medical station, treating wounded from both sides with professional detachment. The civilian rancher, Mr. Townsend, sat quietly in a corner, watching the military precision with evident amazement. "Status?" Jack asked Dwayne, who had established the vault's security protocols. "All approaches covered. Ammunition at 40% capacity. Medical supplies sufficient. Communications intact." Dwayne gestured to their defensive positions. We can hold this position indefinitely against anything short of heavy artillery. Jack nodded approval, then turned to Emily. Helicopter ETA? 12 minutes. They've acknowledged our situation and are approaching with tactical teams ready for immediate deployment. The veterans settled into their final defensive posture, a disciplined calm pervading the reinforced space as each took assigned positions. They had faced worse odds in more hostile environments. 12 minutes was nothing compared to the days-long sieges some had endured in distant conflicts. Sarah approached Jack, medical kit in hand. Let me check that arm. Jack glanced down, surprised to discover a laceration along his left forearm, minor but bleeding steadily. He had no recollection of receiving the wound. Combat tunnel vision, Sarah commented, cleaning and dressing the injury with practiced efficiency. You always did focus on mission to the exclusion of personal status. Jack accepted her ministrations with a slight smile. Occupational hazard. One of many, she agreed, securing the bandage. But we made it through again. A sudden increase in weapons fire interrupted their moment of connection. Outside, cartel forces had begun their anticipated final assault, a desperate push to recover the intelligence materials before federal reinforcement arrived. 3 vehicles approaching from different vectors, Frank reported from his observation position. Coordinated advance with suppressive fire. They're coming hard. Jack moved to the defensive line, assessing the approaching threat through a reinforced viewpoint. The cartel had indeed committed their remaining resources in a final push. Vehicles providing mobile cover for assault teams moving in tactical formation toward the bank building. Selective engagement, Jack ordered. Priority targets are vehicle drivers and team leaders. Conserve ammunition absolutely. The veterans responded with disciplined fire, selecting targets with surgical precision rather than engaging in general suppressive exchanges. Every shot calculated, every target prioritized according to tactical value rather than opportunity. 3 cartel vehicles reached the bank's outer perimeter, disgorging assault teams that immediately established covered approaches to the main entrance. Vargas himself directed operations from behind the lead vehicle, coordinating team movements with professional hand signals. They'll breach the main doors within 2 minutes, Dwayne assessed, watching their methodical approach. Standard stack formation with breaching charges. Jack nodded agreement. Prepare for close-quarters defense. Non-lethal approach remains priority except in direct life-threatening scenarios. The veterans adjusted positions accordingly, establishing interlocking fields of fire covering all approach vectors to the vault itself. They had drilled this scenario repeatedly during Independence's restoration, the bank vault representing their final fallback position in worst-case scenarios. Outside, cartel teams reached the main doors, placing shaped charges at structural weak points identified during their earlier reconnaissance. The resulting explosion shook the building, dust cascading from the ceiling as the reinforced doors gave way. First team entering, Frank reported calmly. Standard clearing formation. 6 operators, heavily armed. Jack watched through the security monitor as cartel forces moved through the bank's outer offices with professional discipline, checking corners, maintaining spacing, advancing methodically toward the vault area. These weren't common criminals, but trained operators executing textbook building clearing procedures. Hold fire until they reach the 3rd threshold, Jack ordered. Let them commit fully before engagement. The veterans maintained perfect fire discipline, allowing the cartel team to advance deeper into their prepared defensive position. When the lead elements crossed the designated engagement line, Jake gave the command, execute. What followed demonstrated why America's Special Operations veterans represented the world's premier fighting force. From concealed positions, the defenders engaged with precisely coordinated fire, disabling weapons, inflicting non-lethal wounds, and neutralizing the assault team's combat effectiveness within seconds. 3 cartel operators went down with extremity wounds that prevented further fighting without causing life-threatening injuries. 2 more found themselves disarmed by shots that destroyed their weapons without hitting flesh. The 6th, recognizing the hopeless tactical situation, wisely surrendered without further resistance. First team neutralized, Dwayne confirmed. Second approaching main entrance now. Outside, Vargas reassessed based on his first team's failure, adjusting tactics accordingly. Rather than sending another team through the compromised main entrance, he directed forces to alternative entry points, windows, service doors, roof access, attempting to divide the defenders' attention across multiple approaches. "They're probing all access points," Miguel reported, monitoring their surveillance system. "Coordinated multipoint approach." Jack nodded approvingly despite their opposition. "Professional response. Distribute defensive assets accordingly." The veterans adjusted positions to cover all potential entry points, maintaining communication to coordinate responses as cartel forces attempted breaches at different locations simultaneously. It became a tactical chess match, Vargas probing for weakness while Jack's team adapted to each approach. For 7 minutes, this deadly exchange continued. Cartel forces attempting increasingly desperate measures to reach the vault, while the defenders repelled each assault with disciplined efficiency. Both sides demonstrated professional restraint, employing disabling rather than killing force when possible, recognizing the difference between combat necessity and unnecessary brutality. Then a new sound cut through the gunfire, the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. Border Patrol had arrived ahead of schedule. Federal assets on final approach, Emily confirmed, monitoring radio traffic. 2 minutes to deployment. Vargas, hearing the helicopters, recognized his window closing. Rather than ordering withdrawal, he made a final desperate decision, leading the remaining assault team himself in a direct approach to the vault. 6 operators moving with coordinated precision, using the bank's architecture for cover as they advanced toward the defenders' final position. Jack watched their approach through security monitors, recognizing the determination in their movement. "They're coming straight in," Vargas leading personally. The veterans adjusted positions one final time, preparing for close-quarters engagement with the cartel's elite team. Jack himself took position at the primary firing point, weapon trained on the approach corridor. Non-lethal engagement remains priority, he reminded his people. "They're finished regardless. No unnecessary casualties." The final confrontation unfolded with the clarity of inevitable collision, cartel operators reaching the vault antechamber, deploying smoke grenades to obscure defenders' vision, moving in practiced formation toward the reinforced door. What they couldn't know was that the veterans had prepared for exactly this scenario. Thermal imaging allowed them to track movements through smoke. Predetermined firing positions covered all conceivable approach angles. And most importantly, the psychological advantage of defending home ground provided the focus that had carried them through countless combat scenarios across the globe. As Vargas and his team made their final approach to the vault door, Jack gave the order, "Execute final protocol." The veterans fired simultaneously, precise shots that disabled weapons, inflicted incapacitating but non-lethal wounds, and effectively neutralized the cartel's last assault team in seconds. Vargas himself took a round to the shoulder that spun him to the ground, his weapon clattering away across the marble floor. All hostiles neutralized, Dwayne confirmed as the smoke began to clear. Breach attempt failed. Outside, the Border Patrol helicopters touched down in the town center, tactical teams deploying in standard formation to secure the perimeter. Through their surveillance system, the veterans watched federal forces methodically clearing buildings, detaining remaining cartel personnel, and establishing control of independence. Inside the vault, Jack approached the wounded Vargas, who sat propped against a wall clutching his injured shoulder. The cartel lieutenant looked up with a mixture of pain and professional acknowledgement. "Who are you people?" he asked in accented English. "No ordinary town residents fight like this." Jack considered the question, then answered simply, "Just veterans who found a home worth defending." Understanding flickered across Vargas's face, recognition of the training and experience his forces had encountered. Special forces. I should have recognized the patterns earlier. Wouldn't have changed the outcome, Jack replied, applying a pressure bandage to the man's wound. Vargas nodded slowly. Perhaps not, but I would have brought more men. Minutes later, federal agents reached the bank building, securing the scene with professional efficiency. The senior border patrol officer, a weathered man named Davis, approached Jack with evident surprise at finding an organized defensive position rather than civilian hostages. "Captain Harmon?" he asked, recognizing Jack from their earlier communications. Jack nodded. "We've secured the high-value intelligence materials. Multiple wounded requiring medical evacuation, both friendly and hostile." Davis surveyed the scene. Wounded being treated without discrimination, captured cartel personnel secured but not mistreated, operations conducted with military precision. "Your people did all this? Held off a cartel assault force with what, 20-some veterans?" 23, Jack confirmed. "Most with special operations background." Davis shook his head in amazement. "DEA's been tracking this particular package for weeks. High-level intelligence on deep cover operations. Would have compromised dozens of agents if it reached cartel leadership." Jack nodded, understanding the implications. "We figured as much from the document markings. That's why we held position instead of withdrawing." As federal teams secured the scene and began processing prisoners, Jack gathered his veterans in the vault's main chamber. They showed the effects of prolonged combat, fatigue, minor injuries, the 1,000-yard stare familiar to anyone who had experienced extended engagement. Yet there was something else in their expressions, a calm certainty that hadn't been present before the conflict. "We held," Jack said simply, looking at each face in turn. "Against superior numbers, against professional opposition, we protected what mattered." The veterans nodded, understanding the significance beyond the immediate tactical victory. They had proven that their training, their bond forged in distant conflicts, translated to defending home soil when necessary. The ghosts of past deployments, missions where objectives seemed arbitrary or meaningless, receded slightly in the face of this unambiguously righteous stand. Miguel gestured toward the bank windows, where first light was beginning to illuminate the devastated town. "Independence is pretty much destroyed. We'll need to rebuild again." Jack followed his gaze, surveying the damage visible even from their limited vantage point. Buildings collapsed, others still smoldering, the careful restoration work of months undone in hours of conflict. "Buildings can be replaced," he said firmly. "What matters survived." Sarah nodded agreement. "The town was never about the structures. It was about what we built together." As federal agents arrived to secure the intelligence materials and formalize statements, Jack looked once more at the veterans who had followed him into this conflict. Wounded warriors who had found purpose in creating something together, then defending it when threatened. The revelation wasn't in their tactical success, but in the deeper healing it represented. The ghosts of Fallujah, Kandahar, and a dozen other battlefields seemed somehow less oppressive in the dawn light. They had brought their skills home, using them not for distant political objectives, but to protect a community they had built with their own hands. The revelation was simple yet profound. Their training, their sacrifice, their bonds forged in combat had found meaning on American soil. Independence would rise again from the ashes of conflict. But its true foundation, the community of warriors who had found healing in its restoration, had emerged stronger than before. That was the revelation that mattered most. 3 days after the battle for independence, Jack stood amidst the rubble of what had once been the community kitchen. Federal agencies had finally completed their evidence collection, allowing the veterans to begin assessing the damage to their town. The scene was sobering. Buildings reduced to charred frames. Walls collapsed from explosive breaches. Shell casings and debris scattered across ground they had once carefully tended. Not quite how we planned to spend the spring, Miguel commented, joining Jack with a clipboard of structural assessments. Engineering team estimates about 70% of structures will need complete rebuilding. The rest require major repairs. Jack nodded, surveying the devastation with the pragmatic eye of someone who had seen worse. Foundations are mostly intact. That's something. Always the optimist, Miguel said with a slight smile. Though I suppose after Fallujah, this looks like a minor renovation project. Jack returned the smile, recognizing the gallows humor that had carried them through darker moments overseas. At least this time we're rebuilding for ourselves. Around them, veterans moved purposefully through the wreckage, salvaging materials, documenting damage, already planning reconstruction. Their methodical approach reflected military discipline, but something fundamental had shifted in their demeanor. The haunted wariness that had characterized many when they first arrived at Independence had been replaced by a grounded certainty. Sarah approached, medical kit still at her side despite the combat's end. Old habits persisted. Border Patrol's incident commander wants to speak with you. They're setting up a command post where the church used to be. Jack nodded acknowledgement. How are our people? Physically, everyone's stable. Martinez needed 16 stitches. Williams has a mild concussion. Nothing career-ending. She paused, considering her next words carefully. Mentally, they're different. We all are. Jack understood her meaning immediately. Combat changed people, for better or worse, depended on context and aftermath. This engagement had been unique. A defensive stand on American soil, protecting something they had built themselves. The psychological impact differed fundamentally from offensive operations in foreign theaters. Different how? He asked, though he already sensed the answer. More present, Sarah replied. That 1,000-yard stare is less prominent. They're talking more, planning future projects, discussing improvements to defensive infrastructure without the usual hesitation. She met his gaze directly. They found purpose in the fight. Validation. Jack nodded, having observed the same transformation. Veterans who had questioned their service in distant conflicts now walked with renewed confidence, their skills having protected something unambiguously worth defending. The nightmares? He asked, referencing the PTSD symptoms that had brought many of them to Independence initially. Too soon to tell, Sarah acknowledged. But they're processing this engagement differently, talking through it together rather than isolating. That's significant. At the makeshift Border Patrol command post, Jack found Commander Davis coordinating the multi-agency response. The federal presence had expanded considerably, DEA, FBI, and State Department officials working alongside Border Patrol to process evidence and detainees. Captain Harmon, Davis greeted him, stepping away from a group of agents. Just the man I wanted to see. Jack had spent the past days providing detailed briefings to various agencies, explaining the veterans community, the cartel incursion, and their defensive response. The official reaction had evolved from initial skepticism to grudging respect as the full scope of what they'd prevented became clear. The intelligence materials have been confirmed authentic, Davis said without preamble. High-level documentation of joint U.S.-Mexico operations against the cartels. Names, locations, operational details of deep cover agents. If it had reached cartel leadership, dozens of operatives would have been compromised. Jack absorbed this without visible reaction, though the confirmation reinforced the significance of their stand. What happens to Vargas and his people? Extradition to Mexico for most. Federal prosecution here for others, depending on specific actions and prior records. Davis studied Jack with professional assessment. Your people did remarkable work. 23 veterans against a cartel assault force, holding position until reinforcement arrived. It's unprecedented. We had advantages, Jack noted modestly. Home territory, prepared defenses, specialized training. And exceptional leadership, Davis added. My superiors are interested in how a group of veterans ended up rebuilding a ghost town in the middle of nowhere, turning it into a defensible position that withstood a small army. Jack offered the simple truth. We all needed something to build, not destroy. Independence gave us that opportunity. Davis nodded slowly. The Rehabilitation through Restoration Project. Your VA counselor explained the concept. He gestured toward the devastated town. Though this outcome wasn't in the original therapeutic plan, I imagine. Adaptability is part of the training, Jack replied with subdued humor. We'll rebuild. Better than before. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. Davis handed Jack a folder containing official letterhead. Homeland Security and Border Patrol are proposing a formal arrangement with your community. Funding for rebuilding, infrastructure improvements, and official recognition as a forward observation post for border security operations. Jack scanned the proposal with surprise. They want to incorporate independence into the border security network. Your location is strategically valuable, close enough to monitor critical corridors, but remote enough to avoid casual detection. Your people demonstrated exceptional capability under pressure. And frankly, having a community of special operations veterans serving as an additional observation point strengthens our overall security posture. The proposal outlines substantial resources, reconstruction funding, improved communications infrastructure, regular supply arrangements, in exchange for formalized cooperation with border security agencies. Independence would remain under veteran control and ownership, but would gain official recognition and support. I'll need to discuss this with everyone, Jack said, considering the implications. We came here for recovery, not to continue service. Davis nodded understanding. Of course, but consider that for many veterans, the hardest adjustment is finding purpose after leaving service. This arrangement offers meaning without surrendering the community you've built. As Jack walked back through the rubble-strewn streets, he reflected on Davis's words. They had come to independence seeking healing from the psychological wounds of combat, escaping environments that constantly reminded them of military service. Now they were being offered a path that incorporated their skills into a new mission, one centered on protecting the community and country they had already sacrificed so much to serve. Near the remains of the hotel, he found Dwayne supervising a team clearing debris and salvaging materials. The former SEAL worked with characteristic efficiency, directing operations while participating directly in the heaviest lifting. Davis offered us a deal, Jack said, outlining the proposal as they worked together to move a collapsed support beam. Dwayne considered this thoughtfully. Institutional support with operational autonomy. Reasonable compromise. But it keeps us in the fight, in a sense, Jack pointed out. Some might prefer complete separation from security operations after what we've been through. Dwayne set down his end of the beam, wiping dust from his hands. You know what I've learned these past few days? Complete separation was always an illusion. We brought our training, our perspective, our capabilities with us to independence. That's why we survived when most civilian communities would have been overrun. Jack nodded slowly. We can't escape who we are. Nor should we try, Dwayne countered. The transformation isn't about forgetting our service or skills, but finding the right application for them. Protecting this place, this community we built, that feels right in a way that some of our previous deployments never did. Similar conversations unfolded across Independence throughout the day as Jack discussed the proposal with each veteran. Their responses varied in specific concerns, but shared a common theme. Finding meaning in their training through defending something tangible and personal had changed their relationship with their military experience. That evening, they gathered in the mine office, one of the few structures that had withstood the conflict relatively intact, for a community decision. 23 veterans, each bearing the visible and invisible marks of combat, both foreign and domestic, assembled to determine their collective future. Jack presented the proposal without embellishment, outlining both opportunities and potential concerns. This changes our relationship with independence. We came here seeking distance from service. This brings us back into the security apparatus, albeit on different terms. Frank, who had maintained overwatch throughout the battle, spoke first. When I left the Army, I thought I was leaving everything behind. The skills, the mindset, the responsibility. What I've realized is that those things are part of me now. The question isn't whether to use them, but how and for what purpose. Sarah nodded agreement. Many of us came here carrying guilt or doubt about our service, wondering if what we did overseas really mattered, if the sacrifice was worthwhile. Defending independence was different. Clear purpose, unambiguous stakes, protecting something we built ourselves. The transformation isn't going back to who we were before, Miguel added. It's finding a new integration between our military experience and civilian life. Independence has become that integration point. Discussion continued thoughtfully, each veteran contributing perspective shaped by their particular service experience and healing journey. Some expressed concern about potential mission creep, others about maintaining their therapeutic community while adding security functions. All recognized that independence had already transformed from simple refuge to something more complex and meaningful. The decision, when it came, was unanimous. They would accept the partnership, rebuilding independence as both veteran community and observation post. Their transformation from combat veterans seeking escape to community defenders embracing purpose was acknowledged and formalized. As the meeting concluded, Emily approached Jack with a satellite communication device. Border Patrol relay from Townsend's ranch. Apparently news is spreading about what happened here. Veterans from across the region are reaching out, asking if they can join our community. Jack absorbed this unexpected development. How many? 17 inquiries already. Former Army, Marines, Air Force Special Operations. All looking for what we've found here. The implications resonated immediately. Independence had begun as a personal healing project, expanded to a small community of wounded warriors, and now stood poised to become something larger. A model for veteran reintegration centered around building and protecting something meaningful. The following morning, Jack stood watching the sunrise from the ridge overlooking Independence. The devastated town below bore little resemblance to the carefully restored community they had built over the past 2 years. Yet in essential ways, it had become more truly theirs, defended with their blood, secured through their sacrifice, its value proven beyond abstract concept. Frank joined him, rifle still carried with the unconscious ease of someone for whom the weapon had become an extension of self. Quite a view. Destruction and possibility all mixed together. Jack nodded. Like most worthwhile things. The new volunteers arrived today, Frank noted. First wave of reinforcements. Davis fast-tracked their background checks. 6 veterans from regional VA centers were indeed arriving that afternoon, the first of what promised to be many seeking the purpose and community independence offered. Jack had reviewed their service records, distinguished combat deployments, specialized training, and the familiar pattern of struggling to find meaning after discharge. We'll need to adjust our restoration plans, Jack acknowledged. More housing, expanded facilities, and enhanced security infrastructure, Frank added. If we're going to do this officially, might as well do it right. Jack smiled slightly at the professional enthusiasm underlying Frank's comment. The sniper had found renewed purpose in protecting independence, a mission that utilized his specialized skills for unambiguously worthwhile ends. We didn't come here looking for a fight, Jack reflected. But when it found us, something changed. Frank nodded understanding. The transformation wasn't about the combat itself. It was about discovering that everything we learned, everything we suffered through overseas, had prepared us to protect something that truly mattered. As reconstruction began in earnest later that day, Jack observed the veterans working alongside newly arrived volunteers and Border Patrol personnel who had offered assistance. The seamless integration of military discipline with civilian purpose reflected their collective transformation, not abandoning their service experience but channeling it toward building and protecting community. Sarah joined him as he reviewed reconstruction plans, her medical kit still ever present despite the battle's end. They're different now, she observed. watching the veterans direct operations with confident purpose. "We all are." Jack nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The transformation wasn't about forgetting combat experiences or pretending psychological wounds didn't exist. It was about integration, finding meaning that incorporated rather than rejected their military service. "Independence was always about restoration," he said. "We just didn't realize we were restoring ourselves along with the buildings." As the sun set over the rebuilding town, Jack recognized that their transformation represented something essential about the veteran experience itself. Not escaping who they had become through service, but finding the right application for the skills and perspective it had given them. Independence had provided that opportunity, a place where building and defending, healing and purpose, individual recovery, and collective mission could coexist. The ghost town that had attracted a handful of wounded warriors seeking escape had transformed into something none of them had anticipated. A community where veterans could integrate their military experience into meaningful civilian purpose, protecting American soil with the same dedication they had shown overseas, but with the clarity and righteousness that came from defending home. 6 months after the battle, Independence stood renewed. Not as it had been before. Something different had emerged from the ashes of conflict. The buildings, reconstructed with federal funding and veteran labor, incorporated enhanced defensive features without sacrificing the community's warm, lived-in character. New residences accommodated the expanded population as word spread and more veterans arrived seeking purpose and healing. Jack surveyed the transformation from the newly rebuilt church tower. What had begun as a personal restoration project now housed 47 veterans and their families. The official Border Patrol observation station, staffed by rotating veterans, maintained a vigilant watch over approaches to American soil. Gardens flourished again, systems functioned with military efficiency, and most importantly, the haunted silence that had once characterized many residents had given way to purposeful conversation and occasional laughter. A small dedication ceremony had marked Independence's official recognition as a border security outpost. Representatives from various agencies, local officials, and journalists had attended, marveling at the community veterans had built while acknowledging the significance of their stand against cartel encroachment. Though some questioned the extent of force employed during the defense, most observers recognized the powerful message sent by Independence's successful resistance. America does not bow to intimidation, whether from foreign powers or criminal enterprises seeking to violate its sovereignty. The cartel's defeat had broader repercussions throughout the region. Intelligence recovered during the battle, combined with prisoners' testimonies, enabled federal agencies to dismantle significant portions of their border network. Smuggling routes were compromised, safe houses discovered, corrupt contacts exposed. The borderlands grew measurably safer in the operation's aftermath. But for Jack and his fellow veterans, the most significant transformation remained personal. The nightmares hadn't disappeared entirely, trauma's legacy persisted, but they had changed character, no longer dominated by helplessness and doubt. The veterans spoke more openly about their experiences, both overseas and during Independence's defense, integrating rather than compartmentalizing their military service. As twilight settled over the desert, Jack joined Sarah on the porch of his rebuilt home. They sat in companionable silence, watching community members move purposefully through evening routines, security checks, garden maintenance, children being called to dinner. "We found what we were looking for," Sarah observed quietly. "Just not in the way we expected." Jack nodded, understanding her meaning perfectly. They had come seeking escape from their warrior identities, only to discover that healing came not from rejection, but from recontextualization, finding the right application for skills forged in combat. Independence now stood as both sanctuary and sentinel, a community where veterans continued their service to America not through foreign deployment, but by protecting its very soil, building something worth defending while maintaining vigilance against those who would threaten it. The cartel's defeat was undeniable. Though some questioned the extent of the veterans' actions, most celebrated the powerful message sent. America does not bow to intimidation. Jack, humble yet firm, quietly stepped back from the limelight, continuing his duties without fanfare, steadfast in moral clarity. Their story stands as a testament to an enduring American truth, that genuine strength lies not in aggression but in preparedness, resolve, and the unwavering commitment to justice and liberty for all. What do you think about this incredible stand? Do you believe strength alone guarantees justice, or does real power lie in partnership, strategy, and bravery? Share your perspective in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories of courage in the face of overwhelming odds.